Hello. My name is Anthony. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Steve, for volunteering me to share. I'll start off. My sobriety date is August 21st of 2020. So I just hit 2 years last month. And I'll tell you what it was like. So I grew up in a very loving family. My mom and my dad would throw an arm and a leg just for me to have dinner tonight, and I always felt like I was overprotected. Like I never got to do things when other kids my age used to do them. I never got to watch PG-13 movies till I was, 16. I never got to like ride across the railroad tracks with my bike, had to stay around my freaking cul-de-sac the whole time. And I'm not saying that's what made me an alcoholic, but that is what I feel like contributed to my behaviors of when I went off to college. So I graduated from this little town of Long Branch, New Jersey, in 2019, Long Branch High School, and I'll explain why I say this after. But 2 weeks before I go to Penn State, I had an engineering scholarship to Penn State. 2 weeks before I was going to go to Penn State, I got whacked in the back of the head with a golf ball on a line drive, and head cracked open, blood everywhere, the whole 9 yards. But good joke. The doctor said, I ended up with a bad concussion, and the doctor was like, you could still go out. And the reason why I say that is, my mom, first of all, my mom is still convinced that that's the reason why I'm an alcoholic. And number two, after that injury happened, I blamed everything that happened in my life on that single injury. So I left 2 weeks after for Penn State. And at this point in my life, I was 18. I don't really know when I had my first drink. I mean, I'm Italian, so I basically drank in the womb. I would say, I probably had like a beer or two every year since like the age of like 13 or 14. It was never like addictive whatsoever. I've always had an addictive personality, but it was never towards alcohol or any other substance. So I leave for Penn State, and I never had this thing called depression before. And depression hit me really hard when I got out there. So some people that talk about I started, with one shot a day, then moved up to 2 shots in a week. No, no, no. I hit it hard right then and there. I was going full throttle. I wanted to be like everyone else. I always wanted to be top dog. So I tried to outdrink everyone that I saw, and it ended me up very sick, very fast, very vilely ill all the time, throwing up everywhere, and even physical injuries of the times that I fell on the ground just from not being able to walk. So, and I remember my old buddy Joey, who he's actually sober now. My buddy Joey, who was kind of like the weed seller of the dorm. I went over to his room and I was talking to him like my therapist. I was like, "Yeah, I feel horrible," and he's like, "You should try this thing called weed." I'm like, "Okay." So, and I tried it, and listen, I'm not gonna lie, I felt really good. I felt really good for 3 hours. And this is why I say for 3 hours. After those 3 hours is the difference between me, my dad, who drinks, but not alcoholically whatsoever. When those 3 hours are up, when my dad goes to bed, he doesn't think about when he's going to have his next drink. He's thinking about if he's going to the gym in the morning, like he's thinking about normal stuff like people. After those 3 hours are up for me, I automatically think, when am I going to be able to feel like that again? I'd probably sneak 2 bottles upstairs just so I could wake up in the morning. I was, continuing doing that. And come December of 2019, I had my first edible, and it was actually laced with fentanyl, and ended up in the hospital throwing my guts up. And I really had no idea what happened. And that experience there was able enough to help me stop smoking weed at that point. That being said, my drinking absolutely skyrocketed. I started drinking literally every day. I would go around stealing bottles from my friends. I drank everything from lean to freaking hand sanitizer to anything I could get my hands on. I was at the point where I didn't want to kill myself, but if anything happened to me, I wouldn't give a shit at all. So I continued doing that. And my story is a lot more about mental health. My story, like, yeah, I definitely had a drug and alcohol problem, but the real problem was what was up in here. The real problem was my thinking, and if anyone's ever been to an in-person AA meeting, there's a think sign. And if you go to a good clubhouse, the think sign's always upside down because we got to change the way we think. I remember being out at Penn State and faking a kid's death just so someone could say sorry to me, because none of this was my fault. I was convinced none of this was my fault. So I would make it everyone else's fault just so I can get some sympathy. So, I tell my parents that, someone died when no one really died. And they came, once they figured out no one died, they came and picked me up February 27th of 2020, brought me home. The plan was to stay home for about 2 weeks, and it was just about to be spring break, and then go back, pretend none of this ever happened. So within 3 weeks of being home, I end up in my first rehab. And I was 19 at the time. I forgot to mention, I don't have any other alcoholics or addicts in the family. I never grew up around them. I didn't even know what AA was until I joined AA. I didn't know any of that. So I get into my first rehab, and the reason why I went into my first rehab was there was about 40 bottles of any hard liquor you can think of in my parents' butler's pantry, and within those 3 weeks, every single one of those bottles was gone. And I would fill up the rum with iced tea and the vodka with water, and my mom would write these little lines on the bottles, and I was convinced, absolutely convinced, no one was ever going to find that out. I would make sure I fill it up right to that line. And my mom would always tell me, you're drinking. And I would be like, no. And I would show her it. And listen, she couldn't tell if it was alcohol or water. The alcohol's been in there for I don't know how long. So the whole bottle smells like alcohol. And I was convinced no one was ever going to find out until March 25th. I remember the day. March 25th is the day that I forgot to fill up the Jack Daniels bottle. And that is the day that my mom realized that she's not insane, and everything in those bottles was not alcohol. It got so bad that even my sweat started smelling like alcohol. And so that's why I went into my first rehab. So I go in there. I'm not going to lie. I was really not serious whatsoever. You're telling a 19-year-old that, he needs to stop drinking. I'm like, oh, fafungul, I had no intention of stopping. So I get out, I move into a sober house, and they tell me to stay sober. They tell me to put down the drugs, put down the alcohol. I'm like, okay. So I put down the drugs and I put down the alcohol, and that's all I did. And that was my mistake. And something that my sponsor, Charlie Mills, and I can say his last name because he says his last name. My sponsor, Charlie Mills, calls sobriety, where I am clean from all mind-altering substances, but I didn't do a damn thing else with my life. I didn't change anything. And being that, I had 5 months of sobriety, I cannot express to you how awful those 5 months were. Those 5 months were worse than even my worst day of getting high or getting drunk. It couldn't even compare to those 5 months because I had no outlet. I was still lying, cheating, stealing. I was doing everything I was doing when I was drinking, except I wasn't drinking. I wasn't working a program. I wasn't doing any of that. So automatically, I didn't have an outlet to express my feelings. And that being said, I would take it out on everyone else. I would take it out on women. I would take it out on my parents. I would take it out on my brother. I would take it out on everything else. And it ended up me, chugging a bottle of mouthwash and 2 bottles of hand sanitizer, just trying to kill myself. And that didn't work. And now I'm like, fuck, I can't even kill myself now. I was in this never ending spiral of insanity, like convinced this time it's going to work. Oh, I was young when I was drinking. Maybe this time, a couple months later, it would work. And it didn't work. And I remember that day when I relapsed, when my mom, my brother, my 2 grandparents came over, and they were ripping me a new one. And in my mind, I'm like, you know what? This is how my life's going to be. I'm going to live in sober houses. I'm going to get sober for 5 months. I'm going to relapse. They're going to come over, rip me a new one. And then, we're going to go on with our lives and, push on to the right like we do with everything else. This time was different. My brother, I love him to death. He's 18 and he's nothing like me, thank the Lord. He never really shows his emotions. And I never got an I love you. I never got anything. And he pulled me over that day and he looked me dead in the eye and he was sobbing. And he looked me dead in the eye and he was like, dude, he's like, Aunt, he's like, if you die, mom, dad, and I are going with you because we can't live this life without you. And that broke me down. Like, I'm a huge family man, and like, to have my little brother, I'm supposed to be the good example, and now the good example that I'm supposed to be is living in a fucking sober house, just relapsing at 19 years old. What is this kid getting for, like, he's got to go to school and tell his friends, oh, I can't go out tonight, I got no one to drive me because my older brother's in rehab. That's not something for a young kid to say. So at that point, I realized, what? I still have no idea what the hell is going on, but something needs to change. And I went into detox, and it wasn't, I wasn't detoxing off of the mouthwash. I didn't get drunk. Newsflash, it doesn't work. Trust me, I've tried it for you. You don't need to do it. This is more of a mental detox to figure out, what am I doing with my life? And I got out, moved into another sober house in Jackson, New Jersey. And a buddy of mine, Matt, told me, he was like, hey, we should go to an AA meeting. And I was like, nope, absolutely not happening. I was so set against it. I wanted to go to NA with the young people and all that stuff. I didn't want to go to AA with all, the Vietnam vets. Somehow something told me to just go to an AA meeting. So I go to my first AA meeting and I raise my hand. It's called the Shoreline Club in Belmar, New Jersey. That was my first meeting. I walk in, raise my hand, Anthony, alcoholic, 30-something days. I share in the middle of the meeting. And after I'm done sharing, this guy looks at me. The guy who's chairing the meeting looks at me. And he's like, is your grandma Mary Ann Giordano? And I'm like, what? I'm like, how the hell do you know that? Like, no one knows that name. That's my dad's mom, who passed away 14 years ago. And no one besides my immediate family knows that name. And the guy who was chairing the meeting was this guy. His name's Mike Dorado. And Mike Dorado, he actually spoke on here. And the Dorados and the Giordanos were part of the Paisanos that came over in the 1800s to Newark, and all the Italians and all that stuff. And we've been family friends. I've known Mike my whole life. Mike is like an uncle to me. I love him to death. Never knew he was in AA. Never knew he was in AA. And I hadn't seen him in 10 years since his father passed away. And the next time I see him, he's chairing my first AA meeting. I didn't know what that was at the time, but I look back at it now and I'm like, there's no way that could have been anything else besides the big man upstairs. There is no way that could have been anything else besides my higher power setting that up. How could I have gone to that specific meeting at that specific day on that specific time at that specific place, which is the only one he chaired, and that be any of my power? It's not. And I made a beeline right behind him. He at the time I was 48 and had 22 years sober, and stayed behind him. He introduced me to my kick-ass sponsor, who's actually speaking here at the end of October. We went through the book. I've paid back every single penny I owed, done all my amends. I've done a thorough fourth step. I almost slacked on my fourth step, which almost brought me to a drink. That's another thing. I was slacking hardcore on my fourth step. It took me about 3 months to do my fourth step, not because I had a lot to write. I did have a lot to write, but I wrote it fast, but because I wasn't doing it. And 9 months sober, the day that I turned 9 months sober, I almost ended up in the psych ward because I wasn't working a program. That kicked me in the ass hard to show, what? It doesn't matter how much time anyone has. Absolutely doesn't matter. If I don't work a program, then it's just going to go downhill faster than a kamikaze. And so, today, what's it like today? I don't even know where to start, honestly. Life isn't perfect. There's days where I just want to say F this, F that, like there's days where I just want to lay in my bed and not get up. But I wake up this morning and I don't have to worry about being sick. I don't have to worry about feeling guilty. I don't have to look at my phone to see who I texted. Where did my $1,000 go? How did I get $1,000? I don't have to do any of that anymore. All I do is I wake up and I look around my room and I'm like, you know what? If I drink today, it might not happen today and it might not happen tomorrow, but if I drink today, everything's going to be gone again, no matter what. Everything, because as soon as I have one, the phenomenon of craving that said in the doctor's opinion snaps in to acceleration, and I immediately go off the rails. Something I'll end with is my very first meeting. Mike told me this thing, and if anyone's been around 5D for as long as I had, they already know what I'm going to say. Mike told me he was like, Ant, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I was like, what? What does that mean? Like, first of all, no one likes being uncomfortable. And if you say you like being uncomfortable, you're lying, because no one likes being uncomfortable. My comfort zone is sitting down on the couch with a bottle of Jack in one hand, a bowl of chili in the other hand, and SpongeBob on the TV. That's my comfort zone. When I get out of my comfort zone, it's doing something that I don't want to do. It's doing something that is either going to require physical labor, mental work, or both. But it's going to be beneficial to me. And just because I don't want to do it, that's the reason why most people don't do it, because that feeling of I don't want to do it overbears the benefits. And it's taken a lot of faith from my end. If I do something I don't want to do, I will grow spiritually, I will grow mentally, and I will grow emotionally. And that's a fact, because it's happened to me multiple times. From staying sober for the next hour to doing a class at school that I didn't want to do because I'm going to be up until 2 a.m. in the morning doing schoolwork. It could range from anything. But if I get comfortable with being uncomfortable, I'm going to grow so much that it's out of proportion from any fucking textbook I've ever opened in my life. But sobriety, it's loaned and the rent is due every day. Thanks for letting me share.